Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 5 of a series you can watch in absolutely any order that you want, because all we are doing is reviewing Modern Horizons 3 cards for draft. We're going to be talking about each of these cards, how we feel about them in draft. We're going to be assigning them a letter grade. As a brief reminder of our grading system, an S is an absolute bomb that we're going to be trying to go into very, very deeply. An A is something where it's always going to be good in your colors and very likely to win you the game. It's an amazing card. You're going to pick it very early, and you're going to be really, really happy to pick it. A B is something that is going to be very consistent and excellent in your colors. It's always going to provide you with advantage. These are still really, really good cards that you're super happy to pick early. C is something that usually fills out the draft. Most draft decks are composed of a lot of Cs. They're certainly not bad cards by any rate, but they potentially have some instabilities or difficulties that you have to actually contend with in your deck building, or they're just like not that great on rate. They don't provide you with anything further than like a continuation of your strategy. A D is something that is going to be pretty bad most of the time. It's the last card in your hand when you die. You don't really want to play these, and you're gonna try to pick up enough C's and B's so that you can cut these entirely. An F is a card you never want to pick. It's always going to go last in the pack, ideally, and you basically are just not really interested in because it's receiving a failing grade. That's pretty much it. Let's jump into the green cards because we got some very, very exciting ones to start with, including Annoyed, Altasaur. Ooh, yeah, this one's delicious. All right, so 5 green green for a 6/5 reach trample, which is pretty small for a large green creature, particularly one at 7. But the card has Cascade, so when you play it, you get to search your library or exile cards from the top of your library till you exile a non-land card that costs less, anything from 6 to 1, and then you get to cast it without paying its mana cost. So if your deck is full of reasonably big creatures and you're kind of doing like the green mid-range thing, you're decently likely to hit like a 4-drop or a 3-drop up with this. You could potentially hit something that's like even better on curve and completely spiral the game out of control, or you can just get a little bit of extra value, find a bear, find some sort of like mana ramp card. Anyways, this card basically always produces 2 very good bodies, and it does some pretty excellent things for you, which I think is just very, very much worth it. This is way, way better than the Cascade Red Hammer because it provides so much more on board. And then on top of that, like the reach and the trample, along with the fact that you get a free card, oh, that's worth the sign-up cost. It's way easier to hit 7 in this format than usual. Green has really good ramp in particular, so the 7 cost is basically no object. I give this card a B minus. I think it is not winning the game for you, but it is always providing you with very, very good value. And there are some situations where the tempo just gets kind of wild if you roll the dice right. So good stuff. Basking Broodscale. It's 2 cost, 2/2 devoid, so has no color, doesn't matter too much. Has adapt 1, so you can put a +1/+1 counter on it if it doesn't have one, and when +1/+1 counters are put on it, you can create Eldrazi spawn creature tokens with sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. It's a 2/2, 2-mana 2/2 with an ability, which, sure, that's nice. It makes it a little bit aggressive. The tokens are a little bit hard to get going, but it's kind of a nice little extra bonus. Being able to turn that into a 3/3 is really, really good on rate. Overall, this card is not doing anything amazing, so the most I can give it is a C+. I think it's pretty good. I think it's very, very strong for like the 2-drop slot, and that is something that you want. You always need 2-drops, and this is a pretty decent choice. The fact that it gives you 2 different Eldrazi for different Eldrazi synergies is really nice, and there are some sacrifice decks that actually care about this kind of stuff, so that's nice too. Overall, really, really solid card. All right, Birthing Ritual, 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, you look at the top 7 cards of your library. Then you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, you get to put a creature with mana value X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield where X is 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value. You put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So yeah, there's some things about this. It's negative card advantage because if you were playing the enchantment, you aren't playing an actual creature, and then you're cycling into other creatures, that kind of thing. So that's not great, but it does have some interesting things going on. First off, it's got potential to order your draws. If you look at the top 7 and you don't sacrifice a creature, then you can potentially like get rid of some cards that aren't really all that important to you. It's not like a big deal. I think that's not even actually a thing because you always have to put the... Oh, no. You don't have to put it because if you sacrifice if you don't sacrifice the creature, you can keep the top card on your library, and then you have an idea of what the rest of your cards are, which is very, very weird. I'm actually wondering if it works that way or if the rules are going to interpret that a little bit differently. But as far as I can tell, it does. If you don't sacrifice the creature, you just get to keep the 7 cards, which is kind of neat. It gets you a lot of information about what's up in your deck, allows you to play around with Cascade and other shenanigans. So that's not a terrible effect on its own. And then, like, of course, the thing that it's actually supposed to be used for is making your 2-drop into a 3-drop, your 3-drop into a 4-drop, your 4-drop into a 5-drop. It's not going to hit that same thing every time, but if you have a lot of like good summon effects, like say for example, Annoyed Altasaur's Cascade, I think actually the Cascade does not trigger because it's when you cast this spell. But yeah, if you have like anything that like when it enters the battlefield effects or when it leaves the battlefield effects, cards that care about sacrificing, there's a lot of interesting internal synergies. At the most, I'm going to give this like a C-. I think that the negative advantage is something that you have to deal with. The amount of like interesting utility to it is very interesting, but it is going to put you down on tempo. If you don't have a particular plan for the deck, it's not amazing. And it's pretty lame if your opponent keeps killing your creatures. Like if you play a bear and then you play a birthing ritual and then your opponent burns your creature, well, now you're down 2 cards. And if you then play another one and they kill that, you're still down 2 cards. So you have to actually stick something and keep it on board long enough for the birthing ritual to work, and then the birthing ritual has to hit the actual thing. So yeah, there's just not enough going on in terms of reliability to compensate for the negative advantage and the negative tempo. But potentially a very strong effect and at least worth the C-. So, branching evolution. 2 and a green for another enchantment. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So this is a good one to note that there is a 2 and a blue card that copies enchantments in the format. It is what is it called? What's it called? I don't actually have the name in front of me, but there is something that actually allows you to copy effects like this, which is pretty nice if you're looking at a rare for 3 that doubles up your counters, because doubling does in fact, you can double your counters twice, which is very, very solid. Okay, so this gives you a lot of counters, but it doesn't give you double counter triggers. If something cares about having +1/+1 counters put on it, then you'll just be putting a big old stack of them on it, which is not that big of a deal. The extra amount of stack does mean that you get like a lot of size advantage, which is really, really neat. But again, this is an enchantment, so it's providing a negative board state in some aspects. It's just making your things bigger, and if hard removal is the thing that's happening, or bounce, or anything that's actually killing these creatures, these cards start to become a little bit worse. This gets destroyed pretty easily by a couple of like different effects, so it is possible to just kind of catch it incidentally off of an angel or something like that. It's a lot to set up. And I don't know, I think the only time where I'm like really interested in it is when you have like 2 or more copies and the doubling starts to get exponential. But overall, I would say that this is a D+. Just not that great a card until you have like all of the different things that you need to actually make it work. All right, Bridge Works Battle. This is a 2 and a green land. We're going to put it in the land thing, and we're going to be reviewing it as a land later, but spoiler alert, it's great. It's a good removal piece that is excellent on the land side. So fixing plus actually like putting your, being able to put less lands in your deck is very, very strong. Collective Resistance, 2 cost instant, escalate greens. You can pay an additional 2 green, and for each green that you pay, you get to pick 1 more mode beyond the first. Destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Of these 3 different effects, I think the one that you're most likely to be using is the hexproof and indestructible, and paying 1 and a green for that effect to save a creature is really not bad. There was a version of this in white in Outlaws of Thunder Junction called Take Up the Shield that gave you a +1/+1 counter and lifelink, but honestly, just saving the creature is always kind of nice, and it's certainly not a thing that you're unhappy to see, particularly if you're getting extra advantage on top of that. Potentially, this is a 3-for-1. You can stop something from killing your creature, blow up an artifact, blow up an enchantment, but based on the way that it works, it's almost impossible to get all 3 modes at once. I would say more likely you're gonna get 1, maybe 2, and overall on rate, it's not gonna be that good, but it's still pretty decent. 2-for-1s on occasion. It at least blanks removal. The bottom mode is the one that matters the most, but overall it's fine, and there's a lot of good enchantments and artifacts in the format that you want to destroy. So I give this a C+. Colossal Dreadmask. 4 green green. It's a living weapon, so it is just a creature, a 6/6 trample creature for 6. And then later on, you can equip for 3 green green. Ooh, this is a lot. Okay, so you can compare this to like that horrible red cascade weapon again, which I'm gonna keep doing. But yeah, like so there was a 6 cost +4/+0 trample, and we talk about like how that could potentially be good by equipping it to all sorts of different creatures because the trample gives you a bunch of reach. Well, Colossal Dreadmask is an example of how you can do that on rate and actually do some pretty wild stuff. This card just has to die or it'll rule the game. It's already a pretty good creature, and then every time you put it on a flyer, every time you put it on a first strike creature or a deadly creature or just basically any number of like ridiculous nonsense death touch creature. Anything that you put it on is probably going to be too big to effectively handle, and also will be pushing across for damage on the trades. So even if somebody can effectively handle it, you're gonna get like a lot of value out of this. This card gets a B. I think it is just really, really strong as a creature and really, really strong as a piece of equipment. And the fact that you transition pretty flawlessly from creature to equipment means this card is always useful when it's played, which is great. All right. Yeah, okay, next up we have Disciple of Freyalise. That's in the land section. Another lovely card, but we will be talking about it later. Most of those cards are going to be getting like C's to B's, and some of them are going to be A's. But basically they're always playable because they are lands. Eladamri Korvik Doll. I really love the naming convention here, where it's Eladamri, Korvik Doll, as if that's a title that means anything to someone who isn't like very into like the magic lore. It's like, oh yeah, me? I'm a Korvik doll. Um, but yeah, a Korvik doll I think is like a uniter of the 3 factions, the Kor, the Vek, and the doll. Mostly it's just like it's just very interesting that it's like the title is something that's kind of unintelligible. I don't know. There's something about that that I kind of like, and I think it's just, you know, amusing to say the words that way. Eladamri Korvik doll. Okay, so yeah, 3 cost 3/3. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You can cast creature spells from the top of your library, and if you tap a green and tap Eladamri, you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control to reveal a card from your hand or the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, you put it on the battlefield, and you activate this only during your turn, which is not an and actually, that's just a caveat. Okay, so this is a 3 for 3. Already, you know, basically everything at 3 is a 3 for 3, but that's still a great rate. It's totally fine. It's good on aggression. It tends to trade with everything else. You feel pretty good about that. Most 3 for 3s have like some small upsides. This is a 3 for 3 with a huge upside. The creature spell from the top of your library is like a pretty absurd advantage engine where you are just getting consistent stuff off the top of your deck. You do have to like, you know, be able to actually find a creature on top of your deck, which means you need a high creature count, but high creature count is the default for a good draft deck anyways, so it is something where, you know, you're going to have 15 creatures or something like that in a 40 card deck. You're going to feel pretty good about this. Now, the green tap here can absolutely spiral the game out of control because you can hit like an immediate Eldrazi. You can play something like a, you can play a Kozilek or a Emrakul or like something that's like absolutely disgusting. You're probably tapping like Eldrazi spawn tokens or like something that's like a little bit less ridiculous. There are a bunch of different ways to make like a small 1/1 like artifact creature token or some Eldrazi spawn, and that's something where you can potentially like get like a really, really wild like tempo spike out of it. So the card is good on rate as just like a normal creature. It gives you a ton of card advantage, and it allows you to basically give a really good like pressure spike where you make a very, very large creature happen very, very early, which is not always worth tapping 3 different creatures on your board, but if the creature is good enough, you're certainly going to want it. Eladamri is an A. There's absolutely no reason not to play this card. It's an amazing reason to go into green. It's probably a snap pick, and I think like it is so likely to win the game if it's not removed. The one thing it doesn't have is the ability to just not get ghost fired, and that means that it will frequently it cannot be the only thing in your deck that you are trying to get to. But really, really strong thing to put in your 3-drop slot. My goodness. All right. Eldrazi Repurposer. Another 3/3 for 3 with a small upside. When you cast the spell and when it dies, you create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless. I think all of the like 3-drop 3/3s with Devoid, there might be one in each color, and all of them do something like this that's pretty close to it. This is one of the better ones. It's reasonably easy to cast. It makes 2 tokens, and it works pretty well for sacrifice themes because not only is sacrificing the Repurposer some mild upside, but of course it gives you all the tokens to sacrifice, which can be helpful if you're sacrificing actual tokens for some particular effect. Overall, this card goes pretty wide, and it seems decent in terms of what it's doing, so I'm going to give this a C+. I think it's a perfectly reasonable filler card that you're reasonably happy to play. Evolution Witness. 2 and a green for a 2/1. The 1 and a green is adapt 2, and when you adapt 2, you just put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Evolution Witness, you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's 2/1, which is not amazing. There are some things that can kill 1 health creatures pretty easily, and it does make it a little bit more vulnerable, but eventually it becomes a 4/3, and that's a much better creature for the rate that you're going for. Even if you're paying 5 for it over a staggered period of time, that's still a creature that is probably going to fight with something on turn 4 when you actually do adapt it. And on top of that, you're getting a permanent back, which is nice. You can get any permanent. It can be an enchantment, it can be an artifact, it can be something that's a land if you need a land in particular. There are a couple of things that mess with lands, but not too many. I think that most players have to kill this thing when it comes out, or it's going to cause problems, and that makes it a B-. It's a really good version of a Gravedigger. I'd say overall it's just a solid, flexible, great option that you're pretty happy to have in the deck. And at common, a really, really strong thing to fill on 3, and it's definitely stronger than Eldrazi Repurposer. So, Fanatic of Veronis. 1 and a green for a 1/4, which adds a green mana. Already good space. You're getting an elf, but the elf is survivable and can resist several different forms of red removal. There's the red sweepers, there's the red lightning bolt effect. Generally, that's a nice space because it's just capable of actually blocking, trading with some smaller things potentially. It's just really, really good body if you want to keep something alive while also using its tap abilities. So the tap adds green. The Ferocious says that you can add green, 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 green if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which is pretty wild. That's a very, very big ramp. 7-drops are amazing in the set. There's a ton of good ones and a ton of kind of mediocre ones that are still fairly powerful. And if you are adding 4 green on turn 3, that just hits you 7, which is kind of wild. Of course, turn 3 having a creature with power 4 or greater is not super possible, so it's more likely you're going to activate this on turn 4 or 5, but even so, it's going to get you a pretty sizable amount of ramp and allow you to play into even 9-drops or other ridiculous nonsense. So yeah, lots of mana for a pretty easy bargain. All you have to do is stick a 4/4, and a 4/4 is perfectly great. Then it has Eternalize. 2 green, green. You can exile this card from your graveyard to make a token copy of it that's a 4/4 black zombie snake druid with no mana cost. You'd only do this as a sorcery, so you can't do it at the end of turn or anything like that, but it's still very ridiculous because now you have something that has Ferocious, is also just a really good creature for rate. If this card gets killed early, you just turn it into a 4/4 for 4, which 4/4 for 4 is perfectly fine to be playing. So no matter what, this card is probably getting some amount of advantage. Either it's getting card advantage because your opponent decides to kill it to prevent you from playing your Eldrazi, and then you just play a 4/4 on turn 4, or it is something where you are just absolutely spiraling the game out of control, playing all of your big green things. Green has a ton of big things in general, so like you know that you're going to be able to do something with all of that green mana. It synergizes with itself because like if you are playing it, you can use the green mana to like play more Eternalizes, and it's not legendary or anything, so you can just kind of do some like neat stuff with that. It's an absurd value card. The only thing it doesn't really do is win the game late, but I'd still put this at an A-. I think it is just really, really excellent. The one thing that isn't great about it is that it is vulnerable to all of Rinse removal. 4 health is the point where you can see like Ghostfire Slash, and there is a 4 damage one that exiles the creature, so you aren't going to get the card back. In both circumstances, that's pretty minor. This was like close to an S contender for me at first look. I still think it's very, very good, but my thought is that like because the card is mostly just providing value and the value is really, really strong, that it's probably not going to be like an A plus or anything like that. But yeah, no, I mean, there's great things that this card can do, and there are going to be situations where it just absolutely bombs your opponent out with like a Kozilek. Fangs of Colonia. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control as a sorcery, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature that had a +1/+1 counter put on it this way, which is weird wording until you see that it has Overload. You can cast it for its Overload cost, which is 6, to change the target to each creature that you control. So you can put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control for 6, then double those counters. At the very least, this is a 1 green sorcery that gives something +2/+2 and modifies it for modified creature stuff. Fangs of Colonia at 6 gives a bunch of creatures +2/+2, potentially spirals a already modified creature completely out of control, and overall feels decently strong. As a sorcery, this card definitely has its weaknesses. Using it early means you have to use it on a creature, which might just blank your 2-drop slot. Like if you draw this and you don't draw an actual 2-drop creature, then you don't feel that great about it. If you are like playing this on a creature if you're like trying to play this at 6 and you lose most of your creatures, then it's kind of pretty mid. Giving a +2/+2 to anything doesn't necessarily prevent it from dying to hard removal, so there's a lot of like potential weaknesses there. That being said, I think it's still like a C+. Overall, this is something that triggers a wild amount of abilities, and I think it might trigger cards like Evolution Witness, anything that triggers off of +1/+1 counters, twice, because you place the counters and then you double the counters, as opposed to placing double the counters. I could be wrong about that, but I think it might do something where if you are like looking at an Evolution Witness, that's something where it is more likely to be giving you extra value on those triggers. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can, by all means, comment. I am. It's been a little while since I've been playing Magic, so still learning some of these smaller interactions, and I'm always very interested in how these work. Flare of Cultivation. All right, so 1 green. You can sack it, non-token green creature to pay 0 for it. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, and then shuffle. So exchanging a card in your hand and a creature on the board for 2 lands. If the lands are really, really good, which they aren't because they're basic lands, but if they are fixing for you or ramping for you in ways that are really, really helpful, there is some potential that you pay 0 for this and you feel kind of okay about it. If you're trying to sacrifice a creature for 0, that's kind of neat. But overall, I don't think this one's like particularly strong. Paying nothing for it is not great because it's not really a combat trick, it's a sorcery. It's kind of fast ramp, but there's a lot of other things to do in green, and like the double green in it already makes it pretty hard to use to like fix mana or like set up other colors. So you have to be like pretty hard in green to use this, and then the main thing that it's doing is trying to get you a little bit further up. If you pay 3 for it, you feel a little unhappy because you missed a drop, and if you pay nothing for it, then you feel a little bit unhappy because you lost a creature. So overall, this is like kind of mid, but could be pretty playable if you aren't planning on using the non-token one very much, or if you have something in particular that you really want to hit at 6 or 7, and you know that your like smaller creatures are going to be set up to sort of play multiple Flare of Cultivations or something like that. Foul Strike. 1 and a green, destroy target creature with flying. Typically this card has like a cycle on it or something like that, but in this case it's reinforced. You can pay 2 and a green to discard this card and put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature. Two mildly good things here. Target creature with flying has not traditionally been all that strong in limited, even though flying creatures, do win games. You don't always have flying creatures in the format, or in the opponent's deck. So if you are specifically trying to target creatures with flying, you will lose some games because there's a dead card in hand. Obviously, that's why they always put the second piece of text on it. You got the reinforce or the cycling or like some other thing that's going on. The nice thing about this is that the reinforce has some good synergy with creatures that care about having +1/+1 counters put on them. So if you have a creature with a very powerful effect when you put +1/+1 counters on it, like the Emperor of Bones or the one that we were just looking at, Evolution Witness, then Foul Strike feels a lot better to pick. But it is nonetheless, I think, a bit of a D. Like, the modularness of this does not really make up for the fact that both of its modes are pretty bad, and you are mostly trying to, like, get one mode or the other to, like, solve a particular problem in your deck, and it's just going to create more issues than it solves most of the time. It is playable, to be sure, but it's not your favorite card to have. Gift of the Viper, 1 green for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter, a reach counter, and a death touch counter on target creature, and untap it. This is so many things. This is an absolutely ridiculous amount of permanent buffs to be putting on a creature at instant speed for 1 green. So you get Death Touch, which means you're probably trading the creature, or if it is like a 1/4 or something like that, you're getting actual value out of the card. You get a +1/+1 counter, which can win a trade, which is excellent, particularly because you can do this before blocks and then get something that you attacked with to basically just mess up your opponent's 2-drop. That's pretty good. You get Reach, which means you can kill flyers, and actually like kill flyers in a much better way than Foul Strike does. And like overall, like there's some pretty interesting things you can do with this. You can make a 0/12 in this format. And there are a lot of 4 health creatures in the format that are pretty fun with tap effects, so you can use Gift of the Viper to even like ramp them or like multiply the amount of times that they can tap, or like, tap them to attack, then basically untap them and do some other ridiculous nonsense. This card seems like it works with basically everything that green wants to do. It's cheap, it's easy to play, it usually provides value, and it's good at like basically everything that it wants. So yeah, I give this card a B+. I think it's very, very strong for a 1-drop, but it's obviously not like breaking the game open or anything. It's just good value every time. Grist, Voracious Larva. Is this our last Planeswalker? I believe it is. Yes, indeed. An insect planeswalker. Finally, our dreams come true. 1 green for a 1/2 Death Touch. Okay, that's a okay card overall. When it enters the battlefield under your control, or any other creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it entered from the graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, you may pay green to exile Grist, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. So, in order to flip it, all you have to do is play a creature from your graveyard. It can be this creature, in fact. So this is kind of interesting because you can just play it as a snake, block with it, and then figure out a way to play it back later. That's okay. I would say a 1/2 Death Touch Snake is not like an unreasonable card. That's like a C card. So the main question is, does the flip actually give you anything that's special? Because if not, it's going to stay as a C card. So let's flip it over. All right, and what do we have? We have a 3-drop that has -2, or a 3 loyalty card that has a -2 of destroy our target artifact or enchantment. Not something you're going to be using all the time, but potentially could get you value. A +1 of create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, mill 2 cards, put a death touch counter on the token if a black card was milled this way. Okay, so this is mostly not that great. You have to be kind of in black. Which I guess you probably are because you're playing Grist out of your graveyard in the first place. You get a 1/1 insect token, and then the insect token has Death Touch. If your opponent could already deal with like the Grist as a creature, they're not going to be too upset by this one, but Death Touch creatures can be good in the format, so it potentially provides some value. I would say it's minimum value, but it is like it's not anything that's going to win the game, but it'll do something for you. -6. For each creature in your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 black and green insect. That's not amazing. Obviously, you do get to like do some useful stuff with that if you can get up to 6, but your opponent is likely to have an answer either to the Grist or to the graveyard before that happens, so you're probably not going to play this particular ultimate. It's a little bit more likely than some of the other Planeswalker ultimates, but it also is not that likely to win the game. Maybe the creatures you have are good enough that you're happy to have copies of it, but that's an awful lot to build around. Overall, I actually think this card is a C. I think the 1/2 creature is pretty good, and the Planeswalker is really nice if you can play it. It certainly feels good, but you do have to spend an extra card to actually get it, which is kind of the thing that all of the other Planeswalkers aren't doing. They are specifically giving you some sort of like way to flip an already good creature to make a Planeswalker, and this is something where you are actually paying a card to do that, as opposed to paying like the counter that Ajani gives you, or paying a couple of mana from Sorin. So like, yeah, you lose a little bit of value on it. The creatures aren't guaranteed to have Death Touch. Artifacts or enchantments aren't guaranteed to be on the board. It's just like a lot of like ifs and ands for not that great effects. And then the creature, yeah, super happy with a 1/2 Death Touch. Nothing wrong with that. All right. Horrific Assault. 1 green, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. If you control an Eldrazi, you gain 3 life. A lot of good things here. It is sorcery speed. It pairs with Death Touch, which is always nice, particularly if you have, say, a planeswalker that is a angry snake. Yeah, like I think this is like pretty fine as far as like just a nice pre-combat trick goes. You can just use this to, or it's not really a trick, just pre-combat removal spell goes. You can use this to like get a little bit of a leg up on your opponent. It gives you potentially some life, which helps out with race situations, particularly if you're like trying to just beat down against a red deck. This will basically like flip the game from you not being the beatdown to you being the beatdown. Overall, there are usually better versions of this card in the format, and there are in fact better versions of this card in the format, but I'd still give this like a solid C+. It's definitely a good fight spell, mid-fight spell that you feel pretty happy with, and I don't know, synergizing with Eldrazi is fine. All right, Hydra Trainer, 1 and a green. You can exert this card when it attacks, which causes it to not untap during your next untap step. When you do, target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on permanents you control. You can adapt 2 for 3 to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it as a like play. So 1 and a green for a 1/1, definitely not great there. Pay 2 and a green on turn 3. It's a 3/3 for 3, which is getting a little closer, but you did skip your 2-drop. And then when you attack, you can exert it, and it'll get +2/+2 because you have 2 counters on it. So it attacks as a 5/5 on turn 4. And then it doesn't untap. This card kind of hurts my brain. It is just like doing a lot of weird things to get a pretty minor bonus. If you have a lot of +1/+1 counters, it gets pretty out of control, but the card doesn't have trample, and it is giving you like this on-turn, off-turn thing where you aren't always able to block with it. It only is good on the attacks, and it can only attack half the turns. It gets chump blocked pretty often. It can provide you with some value, but like I think the fact that the only thing that's saving this from being like a D card is the fact that if you're doing like some really wild shenanigans with +1/+1 counters, or even just some good shenanigans, you can get up to like +10, +25, and that can be something that your opponent becomes very, very aware of and very afraid of. But overall, yeah, I'm not super excited by any particular part of this card. I give it a C-. Lion Umbra. Double green For an enchantment aura, enchants a modified creature, so it has to already have +1/+1 counters or enchantments or equipment on top of it. The enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has vigilance and reach, and also this card has Umbra armor, so if the enchanted creature would be destroyed, you remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. Umbra armor is an unusual one because most of what it is doing is like kind of helping you out with certain types of removal, but not other types of removal. If the card is exiled, it still causes problems for you. If the card is bounced, it still causes problems for you. And you still get 2-for-1 in the way that auras generally do get you 2-for-1. +3/+3 and vigilance and reach are all okay things, but like you have to pay double green for that. I would say that's okay on rate. If you're doing it on like a very early creature or like even for a very late creature when you're going to play some other like tricks, you're probably going to get some decent value out of this. But I just think that like it's mostly not all that great because it's fairly hard to play. You have to actually have the modified creature, and you can potentially 3-for-1 yourself if you're trying to set up a modified creature in that respect. The 2 green means you don't have that many options to like add additional modifications. You have to like use green modifiers because you can't play like a black equipment on turn 1 and then like set it up quite that well. It's a little bit harder to play other colors while also playing the Lion Umbra, which cares about other colors because you need to reach really hard into all of the different modifications that you can do. I give this card a D. I think it's just hard to synergize with, and then like what it actually provides you is not all that great. So Malevolent Rumble. If you miss this, you are down 1 card, but there are some potential things going on here. All right, so 1 and a green. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a permanent card from among them into your hand, put the rest of the cards into your graveyard. You create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature and add 1 colorless. So compare this to Buried Alive, the 2 and a black card that just puts 3 creatures into your graveyard. This already puts creatures into your graveyard, but it's doing it while potentially replacing itself as a card, and also giving you an Eldrazi spawn creature. So this is kind of a reason why, like, you know, that card belongs in sort of the F slot amongst other things. It's easy to go down a card because if you miss and get like a bunch of instants or something like that, you're not going to feel that wild about that. But also lands are permanents. 4 cards is pretty reasonable. I'd say you're fairly unlikely to miss. It's just like a really bad beat if you do. So that is something that's helping out this card quite a bit. It disrupts curve for you. It disrupts your tempo a little bit because all you're doing is creating like an extra creature. But it does help you get consistent value, gets you into those 4-drops pretty quickly. You can play this on 2 and then play a 4-drop on 3 because you're always going to hit a land drop. So if your plan is to get to a specific 4-drop or even just get into your later drops earlier, Malevolent Rumble is helping out quite a bit there. I give this card a C. It's a solid slot filler. It is something that you can do on 2 because you're pretty happy like just playing bigger things, and you can kind of adjust the curve of your deck pretty easily with it. So not hard to synergize with, not particularly difficult to build around, but what it is providing is of limited utility overall. Monstrous Vortex. Every card above power 5. All right. 3 and a green. When you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, you discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. Exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. Cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand if you don't want to cast it. That's kind of a nice little bonus if you want to like hold a counter spell or something like that. But overall, this is kind of interesting. Okay, so every single card above power 5 or greater gives you card advantage. That's kind of neat. You have to play 2 creatures to get back to actual advantage, but the first creature will get you back to even because all you have to do is just play 1 creature and then you get to like exile a bunch of cards and find exactly what you need, which is awesome. It doesn't like actually get rid of the cards, so it's not going to like mill you out or anything. Those cards do eventually go back on the bottom, and also the cards are cast from exile, which triggers with a couple of like red synergies amongst other stuff like that. This takes a bit to get going, but it will get you to win a game if your curve has a lot of like middling cards that have like that power 5 or greater. You can't really pick this late if you don't have the creatures, and if you pick it early, you still have to go for the creatures, which can create some problems for you. I think that takes it out of B territory and into like a C+. I think it's just like a little bit difficult to run in draft, but it's not a card that you're like super unhappy to take. You're always going to pick it like in the middle of the pack if you don't have other options, or if you like have the particular synergies for it. And at that point, it will really start to actually do some like B level work for you. Nightshade Dryad. 1 and a green for a Death Touch. It can add colorless or a mana of any color, so it can fix for all 5 of the other colors. So yeah, there's a basically pretty simple option that can use all of your like different green removal cards that deal damage to your opponent. I almost like this better than like the 1/2 planeswalker for 1 actually, just because it's doing quite a bit more reliable stuff in addition to being a death touch creature. But like yeah, that's sort of your mileage may vary on that. Fixes for every color, including colorless. It's not particularly good for tempo, but it will trade with basically anything, so that's great. And also, like, if you are trying to set up for a bunch of other good removal, this is pretty wild. The one thing I would say that's kind of bad about this card is that it's cleared by all those red sweepers. There are a bunch of red cards that deal 2 damage to each creature and each opponent, and that's a bit of a problem since this is a mana source for you. So if your opponent can clear this out, they can potentially put you back quite a bit. But I don't know, like, the card demanding removal is not like the worst thing in the world. It is going to trade, and overall, it's providing exactly what you want, so I think it's a B-. Nyxborn Hydra. Bestow X green green, or just pay X green. If you bestow, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Nyxborn Hydra and has reach and trample. If you play it as creature, it's the same thing. It has that many +1/+1 counters and has reach and trample. I read that in a very weird order, but the general idea is that it's an X creature that gets a bunch of +1/+1 counters, and then you can just do some wild things with this. So it's neat for modified creatures overall. Trample on an X creature is actually just like a way to win the game. If you bestow this as like even just like a pre-combat thing to do, you can potentially get like lethal damage out of this, which is nice. On rate, the card is decently big. It is always going to be a little smaller than you'd like it to be. A 1/2 is not great for 1. A 2/3 is not all that great, or a 1/2 is not great for 2. A 2/3 is not great for 3. A 3/4 is not great for 4, and so on and so forth. They're all pretty mid stats for the cost, but if you're using the bestow, then you get the stats once, and it protects the creature and gives it a bunch of bonuses, which is great. And if you use it, and then you also get the creature again when that creature dies, which is awesome. There's a ton of +1/+1 synergy in the format, so that's really nice. And the amount of ramp here also kind of helps this card out. I give this card a B-. I think it's a super strong common for what it's doing. Path of Annihilation. Turns all of your spawn tokens into elves. It's 3 and a green. Gives the enchantment sorry. Oh my goodness. All right, let's try that one more time. 3 and a green enchantment. It is devoid. When it enters the battlefield, you create 2 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. With sacrifices creature, add a colorless mana. Eldrazi also have add 1 mana of any color, which is awesome for a couple of reasons. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, you gain 4 life. Okay. Couple of cool things about this. The main thing is that it gives you kind of these super Eldrazi tokens. Your Eldrazi can now tap for mana instead of sacrificing for mana. They can tap for colored mana, which is really awesome. And in addition, they can tap for mana and then sacrifice, because you don't have to tap your Eldrazi spawn to sacrifice them. So you can get 2 mana out of the 2/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens that you made each, which is quite good if you want to jump from 4 to 9. And, you know, there is a 9 cost in this format, and it's pretty good. So yeah, overall, I would say this is definitely something that does a ridiculous amount in terms of what it's working for. It continues to benefit all of your Eldrazi as time goes on. The cast a creature spell with mana 7 or more is not like a huge effect, but it does really help out, because like one of the problems with big ramp decks is that they tend to fall behind a little bit on the pressure game. So like opponents will pressure them down to like really, really low health. They'll get out their big creature, but they won't be able to attack with it, because if they expose themselves, they're going to take lethal. That's like a really common problem with any deck that isn't playing good tempo, and it's a reason why we care so much about these earlier stat lines of like the 2/2 for 2, the 3/3 for 3. If you're skipping that, you do need something that helps like sort of make up that difference, and Path of Annihilation is providing that with the extra life gain, because you can ignore a little bit more damage as a result of just gaining life off of your Eldrazi, which is cool. So yeah, this card opens up a lot of options in draft. It makes it much easier to cast your 7-drops. It is generally helping you out on a lot of different axes. It gives you the fixing, which is excellent, and it's fairly cheap. Like, I would say that overall it's definitely not bad for what it's doing. I like this one a lot. I give it a B+. Priest of Titania. 1 and a green, add a green for each elf on the battlefield. There are few elves. It's not as many as you'd like. So most of the time this is tapping for like 1 green, maybe 2 green. Massive Ramp is reasonably strong, but the body is not doing anything for your tempo. People will generally like becoming fairly prepped for large creatures. So the more cards you're playing for this kind of like ramp, the more this is going to suck. Playing a lot of elves is not actually all that great, because you actually kind of, I think, want to hit your Eldrazi with less cards as opposed to play a bunch of combos to get to them faster. So yeah, I'd say that's like kind of the main reason. I'd give this like a C-. It's hard to keep a lot of elves on board. It's not doing amazing things for you. It is a tap for 1, and that's always going to do something in the format, but like I don't think it's going to be all that amazing. Primal Prayers. All right. 2 green, you get 2 energy. You can cast creature spells with mana value 3 or less by paying energy rather than paying their mana costs. If you cast a spell this way, you can cast it as though you had flash. So 4 mana for 2 energy is a pretty bad rate. Just like absurdly bad rate, in fact. This allows you to cast creatures with energy, but the utility is pretty limited, like because you can only pick creatures that have mana value 3 or less. It turns the creatures into combat tricks, but the problem is that like you're still just really having a lot of issues actually playing the creatures because you don't have a lot of energy to start with. So that's kind of tricky. I would almost give this an F. The thing that might save it is that energy creatures can kind of play themselves out, so you can just kind of play Primal Prayers and then play a bunch of 2-drops all at once, and you can just do that on turn 4. But that's kind of a gimmicky deck. It's not going to win. I think it's an F. I think overall it's very unlikely that this card gets you what you want. It's nice if you can like pop out a creature and block one of your other creatures, but you already lost card advantage by playing this. So, and you lost a lot of tempo as well. So actually having like a cheap trick combo is not going to help you that much more. And the 2 energy doesn't even give you enough to activate the card effectively most of the time. So yeah, I'd say it's an F. It's definitely not worth it. Okay. Propagator Drone is next. We've got 2 for a 2/2. It is devoid, has no color. Creature tokens you control have evolved, so whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has greater power toughness than this token, you put a +1/+1 counter on this token. So basically, all of your 0/1 Eldrazi spawn tokens will grow up whenever you play a creature, which is kind of awesome. They can grow to 1/2s pretty quickly. They can grow to 2/2s pretty quick. 2/3s pretty quickly, and once they're 2/3s, I'd say they're actually looking pretty good. For 3 and a green, you can create an Eldrazi spawn creature token, which is a minimal effect, but nonetheless one that actually provides a sizable amount of value on the board if you are continuing to play lots of these creatures all at once. So yeah, I'd say this is fine. The tokens aren't all that good, but being able to consistently generate chump blockers or sacrifice outlets can be really strong in this draft. It doesn't really win the game, but it's part of like some very good combos and is okay on curve. I'd give this a B-. Signature Slam. Hey, this is a good one. 2 and a green for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and then each modified creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So instant speed version of Throw from the Saddle, or whatever you want to call it. It is just always going to allow you to fight with the next creature and do something really, really nasty to it. So you put a +1/+1 counter on one creature, which usually gets the creature above the point where it can actually kill whatever it is that you're aiming it at. But even if it isn't big enough, you can also do even more damage if you have other modified creatures, because you could combine all of their damage in. So that can potentially deal like, damage in like the 8 to 12 range. It'll just push like the entire majority of your board out, which is neat. In addition, this card is castable at instant speed, so you can use it as a combat trick. Say you've got a 3/3 running up against two other 3/3s, and your opponent blocks with one 3/3, or even if it blocks with both, you play this card, get a 4/4, kill one of their 3/3s, and now you're like several cards up. It's really, really good stuff. Overall, this is like a B plus. Like removal cards usually don't like win the format, but this provides you with enough advantage and is consistent enough that you're going to be really happy to play it basically every time. And yeah, it's pretty excellent. Okay, so 6, 200 green for a 2/4 reach. Whenever it attacks, you mill 3 cards. You can put a land from among them into your hand. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanents cards in your graveyard have retrace. You can cast permanent cards by discarding a land in addition to paying their other costs. Okay, so this is an interesting engine. Retrace is not really card advantage, although the fact that you are getting lands does help with that. I would say this card has a tough time continuously attacking often enough to trigger the kind of effects that it really wants to trigger, but even if you get like one attack with this, you potentially can then play a card from your graveyard because you're going to put 3 cards in. One of them might be a creature, and then the other one might be a land that you get back to reactivate the creature. The rate is pretty exactly fine. The card does die to the majority of red removal. It doesn't trade with that many creatures, particularly like since it's a 3-drop, it's going to be like running into 4-drops if you're on the draw. I think it's just like a little bit weird. The mill is card advantage, but it's not particularly reliable. Overall, I don't think I can give this card like a higher than a C+. I feel a little awkward about that because it is decently okay on rate, and like that engine can be very scary. But I don't know. It's asking quite a bit, and the fact that it continually mills you when you attack can create some problems for you later in the game unless you are really kind of delving into that graveyard play. So yeah, I think it's pretty mid. Okay. Sowing Micah Spawn. All right, 3 and a green. You can play it as a 3/3. It is kicker 1 and 1 colorless, and when you cast the spell, you search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield. When you cast the spell, if it was kicked, you also exile target land. So 3/3, but you get a free land, which that's pretty good for 4. Not bad. It's an Eldrazi, so it gives you a bunch of Eldrazi synergies while also setting up your other Eldrazi by ramping you. Good stuff. Then, on top of that, you can potentially pay the 6 to exile land, which isn't something that's going to like win the game, but can mess with your opponent's color fixing. It can mess with their non-basics in ways that can really like help you out. There are some non-basic lands that are going to be pretty scary. I'd say this is fine as like part of most late game plans. Like if you're trying to do anything that's like in the mid to late game, there's a good chance this creature trades with something. The land is a great bonus, and you're going to get your Eldrazi just a little bit faster as a result of playing it. So yeah, this is a solid C+. Lovely card. Springheart Nantuko. 1/1 bestow. When you bestow, it is 1 and a green. When you play it, it's 1 and a green. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a green if it is bestowed, in which case you create a token that's a copy of the creature you bestowed it on. So if you didn't create a copy this way, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. All right, so let's see here. It has to be attached because... Oh, wait, does this? Okay, I'm not sure if this is a 1/1 that creates 1/1 insects every time you play a land. I think that is the correct way to interpret this wording. No, I think it has to be attached. So you can either create a copy of a creature or you can create a 1/1 insect creature token. I don't think that if it is a 1/1 creature itself and not a bestow, that you get the 1/1 insect creature token. So yeah, but even so, this is like a mostly 3-drop enchantment. You're going to play this on turn 3 when you can put it on a creature and then immediately make a copy of it, which feels pretty good because not only do you give the creature +1/+1, but you make a copy of it. That's great rate on turn 3. And then you have 1 mana left to play a trick like your Viper Touch or something like that. So very, very obnoxious and like pretty great on rate on that front. I'd say playing this as a creature really sucks, but like it's still pretty excellent as an aura, and as an aura, it basically always makes creatures for you. So, uh, really just doing a lot. You always get this creature back as a 1/1 at the end of it, so it creates opportunity for creature token sacrifice. I'm curious if you get the 1/1 insects if you don't, if this card has become a creature. Uh, I think that would raise my ranking of it a little bit, but I think I'm putting it in an A minus, so maybe not by very much. Overall, it looks very strong. It's a little confusing, and I'm gonna have to wait until like I can play it in arena to be sure of how it plays, but I'm still picking this very strongly. Sylvan's Safekeeper. 1 green, sacrifice a land. It's a 1 green. It's a 1/1 human wizard. Sack a land. Target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. So 1 and a green for a 1/1 with a pretty annoying ability. This card's fairly strong against like high power constructed decks because it is a 1 green creature that allows you to just actively protect insane threats. But it's pretty hard to build around, and it curves pretty poorly in limited formats because most of what you're doing here is sacking a land to protect a creature that is, a C. It's not amazing as an early pick. It is something that you'd be okay with picking later, but yeah, if you make a bad call and sack the wrong land for this, you just feel the worst about it. I think it is annoying enough for your opponent that like it can potentially be very interesting. This is one of the most deck dependent like grades that I can think of because it's actually like really sick if all the pieces align, but most of the time like this is going to keep putting you down tempo in order to protect creatures that are not necessarily worth sacking a land for. I think this is probably like a D. I don't think you want to play this on 1. And I don't necessarily think it's great unless you have very good bombs and you know what you want to protect and you're okay with sacking lands to protect it. When it can do that, it feels okay, but it can also just get picked up by a sweeper and that'll be the end of it. So, yeah. Temperamental Oozewag, 3 and a green for a 4/4 with adapt 2, so a 4/4 that turns into a 6/6 on the next turn, while giving you a little bit of extra mana to play around with. Modified creatures you control have trample, so it turns into a 6/6 with trample. Ooh, yeah, that's pretty delicious. The trample is just something that kills people. This is a very solid common at 4, and getting a 6/6 out of a 4-drop feels pretty good for you. 6/6 trample in particular. I'd give this a B. I think it's just, yeah, you never don't want to play it, so that's kind of where the B lands. Territory color, 4 and a green. Devoid has no color. It has reach. It has landfall. When a land enters the battlefield near your control, you'll get a top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you can reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. 7/5 is a surprisingly good value for 5. That is a lot of damage. It has 5 health, which is what we might call enough health. It basically just does not get killed by most red removal, and on top of that, it is like very, very nasty on damage for how cheap it is. This is one of the most interesting like 5-drop curve slots I've seen. Like most of the time when you're playing a 5-drop, you're looking at like a 4/5 or a 5/5 with like an unusual ability, a 5/4 I have seen, a 7/5. That's actually something where like the rate on this card is just generally worth it alone. The reach is kind of a plus and allows it to kill dragons, but not like particularly well. It's okay to put things into your graveyard if it's a spell or a land because you can then like kind of sort your draws a little bit. But overall, I'd say this landfall ability is not actually all that useful. It is something where you can get some free cards out of it for your lands, and that is pretty important. I guess the question is, do I always want to play this card? Or do I consistently want to pick this card? Currently, I have it as C+. It's got some potential for a B-, but I think I'll leave it there. I've seen this card in action. It was one of my last rounds in the pre-release. Somebody played this and they whiffed every single time, which is not a real mark against it. The fact that it does provide any card advantages at all is really a point in its favor considering how good its stats are. But 7/5 is kind of awkward, and I just don't think that it provides enough to like extremely justify playing it every time. It's really close. This is one of the closest like B minuses, I'd say. It's a B minus, but it's very low. Is I think where I'm finally putting it. It is advantage, but it's just a iffy card in some aspects. The Hunger Tide Rises. Oh, I don't have notes on this one. Okay, let's see here. 2 and a green. Create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token every single time. I have seen this one before. It's a saga. Okay. So, 1, 2, 3 turns, you get a token for 3. And then on the 4th one, you sacrifice any number of creatures, search your library and/or graveyard for a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of creatures sacrificed this way, and put it onto the battlefield. Search your library this way, shuffle. This is pretty bad, actually. So, turn 3, you get a 1/1. That's pretty bad on rate. Turn 4, you get another free 1/1, which is still not good on rate. Turn 5, you get another free 1/1, which would be okay on rate, except that you're on turn 5 now, so getting 3 1/1s does not feel quite as good unless you are like really like playing up those sacrifice synergies. And then turn 4, maybe you get a creature that you really thought was important, but it has to be something that is A, very cheap, and B, worth sacrificing a bunch of different creatures for, and then even then, like, you just sacrifice basically all of the value that the Hunger Tide has already created in order to play a creature which could have just been this slot in your deck. I think unless you have like a very, very strong 3-drop, like an Eladamri Korvac doll, which even then, playing that on turn, like, what is that, 7? Turn 7? Is not that great. I just don't think this card ever provides you with enough. I'm going to give it a D minus. It has that very interesting tutor potential. It creates some card advantage, so you're not like completely unhappy to play this in slot, but most of the time this is not going to do what you want it to. Thief of Existence. Okay, so one colorless and 1 green for a 3/4. All right, that's not a terrible rate, although the colorless and green does mean it's more likely to play at 4 than 3. When you cast this spell, exile up to 1 target non-creature, non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. Yay, that's good stuff. If you do, Thief of Existence gains when this creature leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. So it gets rid of the creature, but your opponent gets a card back later, so you don't actually gain card advantage out of it. You just gain board advantage, which is to say you play something and you get to remove a blocker or you get to remove a problem, and notably that problem is gone for good, which is, yeah, that's ideal for a 3 or 4 drop. If you're playing this on 4, you're not unhappy. If you're playing this on 3, you're not unhappy. It's a little bit hard to play, which is something to note, but like as an Eldrazi creature with a pretty solid stat line, I feel pretty good about this. I'd say overall, I'd be pretty comfy playing this. Colorless makes it a little bit harder to cast, and the card draw is potentially quite scary at the end of it. I think that makes it probably a C+, just because it's never giving you like actual card advantage, and I think it's just a little too awkward in general in terms of playing it. But it's very close to a B- again. All right. Trickster's Elk. 2 and a green, 3 mana 3/3 that can modify a creature, including your opponent's creatures. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3, or you just play it as an elk for 3/3. So 1 and a green to turn your opponent's creature into an elk is not all that good. There's a lot of problems with it, namely that most creatures are going to be perfectly fine with being a 3/3 elk. A lot of them are even going to benefit from it. I've definitely had my opponents try to play this on like an amassed army with several +1/+1 counters on it, and that did not go very well. I would say that this is something where it's just like a little tricky to activate effectively as like an opposing option. If you're playing it on your own creature, and your creature's like a modified creature that has a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it anyways, then you get some good bonuses, and then you get a 3/3 elk later. That's kind of cool. You can even do it like to like an early 1-drop and then make it like a much bigger drop. If you have like a 1-drop that gets a +1/+1 counter or anything like that, this is kind of an interesting beat, so that's kind of neat. Mostly, it's like an on-rate 3/3, and that is something that you do care about. The modality of that, I think, pushes this up into like a B- space. It's bad to target your opponent's creatures with, but sometimes you need to, and it's got some other like general features to it that feel pretty okay. So yeah, I'd put this at a B-. Um, Warp Tusker. Oh, no, Wirewood Symbiote. All right, all right. So 1 green, return an elf you control to its owner's hand. Untap target creature, activate only once each turn. Green for a 1/1 insect. The bounce is a combo piece. So bad on rate, and then it activates a full combo loop. So that puts it at a D- or an F. It's a really awkward 1/1. The abilities really limited because you can only activate it once each turn, so even if you use it as a combo piece, you can't get like an infinite combo out of it. I think this is just kind of fundamentally pretty garbage, and I don't think there are enough elves to actually activate it. It's probably one of the worst cards in the set, and there's just not much going for it in general, apart from it being a 1/1 for 1, which I guess that helps. Yeah, so this is an F. I don't think you ever want to play this. Wampus Aberration, 3 and a green. When you cast a spell, if colorless wasn't spent to cast it, target opponent may put a creature card from their hand onto the battlefield. It has trample and is a 6/6, which is kind of neat. Okay, so 3 and a green for a 6/6 is kind of cool. You do have to pay the colorless for it, or else you're going to get some problems, but card's very big. Is big card. It's a pretty great aggro to mid-range card. The colorless is not really all that hard to play. It's hard as heck to kill if you can actually play it on curve, and I'd say that's not really all that hard to do. And if you play it late, it's still got enough impact on the board to be some amount of pressure. So yeah, this feels fine. I would say this is just decent enough, and the trample here really kind of pushes it into like maybe like B- space. It's just solid stuff. Try not to play it if you don't have the colorless. I think that is the place where you can really start to get blown out in some ways that you don't really want to. But it's not really hard to get one colorless, and that seems pretty easy to do. So yeah, this is like a B-. Good stuff. Okay, that's all of our green cards. We just have a couple more reviews left, and then we'll be done. The next one's gonna be like twice the length. We might have to split it into 2 parts, but I'm hoping not. And then we will be onto the non-creatures in the lands. So yeah, all we've got left now are the multicolored and colorless cards and the lands. Stay tuned for those. Subscribe if you want to, and thank you so much for watching. It was really nice to be reviewing these cards. I hope you enjoyed the Eternal Player's perspective on all of the different Magic cards, and we'll definitely be back with some more very shortly. Cheers!